Hi, I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 4, The Spoils of War. This might have been the greatest episode of Game of Thrones I've ever seen. It had character reunions, it had mystery, it had mythology, it had an amazing battle sequence. Seriously, is every episode this season gonna kill off hundreds of extras? I mean, I guess it's true, all men must die, unless they're kind of important. Anyway, there's so much to break down. This is almost like a season finale, but in the middle of the season. So let's get started with the opening images. So right away, we see the victorious Lannister and Tarly armies marching away from the defeated Highgarden. And we see what they're carrying, a Scrooge McDuck quantity of gold, which the Lannisters plan to use to pay their debts to the Iron Bank. Now these are the spoils of this war, which is also this episode's title, The Spoils of War. Spoils refer to the valuables a winning army loots from the losing side. And we see here in this scene what the literal spoils of the Lannisters defeating the Tyrells are, but we don't know yet what the spoil is saying about the spoils of war until much later this episode, so I'll come back to that. But let's just say this isn't just the gold that's critical to the Lannisters, it's the food too. They're forcing all the farmers in this area to hand it over. Now, why are they doing that? Jaime actually brought this up in the first episode, that soldiers and horses need to eat. In war, the best fed army usually wins. Also remember, they're bracing for a siege from Daenerys' forces, and at that point they'll have limited access to food supplies. And yeah guys, it's winter. Everyone is stocking up on food, and in the long run, food is going to be a much more valuable resource to everybody than gold is. Now, even though Jaime pays off Bronn with this heavy bag of gold, Bronn still wants a castle. Now, of course, back in Season 5, Jaime made this promise to him.
But you're going to come with me and help me with something important. And when we return, I'm going to give you a much better girl and a much better castle.
Also, notice how Jaime promises to reward Bronn after the war is won. This is the same kind of tease that Cersei just pulled on Euron last episode.
You shall have what your heart desires when the war is won.
Of course, this isn't exactly the same kind of tease. Although who knows, maybe after the war, Bronn will have his shot at Jaime. He's a handsome guy. Okay, let's move on to the Red Keep, where Cersei is again meeting with Tycho Nestoris from the Iron Bank. And notice how he says this line.
I always considered your father a very effective and efficient man, but you appear to be redefining those terms entirely.
Now, Tycho isn't just talking about Cersei's efficiency at repaying the crown's debts. He's also hinting at her efficiency at wiping out all of her enemies. Now, her father, Tywin, set the bar pretty high with the Red Wedding and that whole Rains of Castamere incident, and sacking King's Landing, the king whom he was the hand of, by the way. But by blowing up the Sept of Baelor, Cersei topped all of that. In one stroke, she torched all of her enemies in King's Landing simultaneously, which was very effective and very efficient. Now, when Cersei discusses the next steps, she mentions the Golden Company of Essos. So, who are these guys? Now, we've actually heard the Golden Company brought up on the show before in Season 4 by Sir Davos as a mercenary army from Essos that Stannis could use to invade Westeros.
10,000 skilled soldiers fight for the Golden Company. The Golden Company? Never broken a contract. They're sellswords.
But the books goes into their history a lot more. See, the Golden Company was founded by a Targaryen bastard 100 years before these events, a man named Aegor Rivers, aka Bittersteel. He fled Westeros following the Blackfire Rebellion, and he first joined the Second Sons, which was Daario Naharis' sellsword army. But then he decided that he could create his own better company of mercenaries. So the Golden Company took other runaway skilled fighters from Westeros, people kind of like Jorah Mormont, and then used them to sack cities in Essos, fight occasionally in rebellions back in Westeros, and now in the show, apparently helping the Iron Bank force debtors to pay up. But then Cersei has this cryptic line about her plans for the Golden Company.
I too would like them to recover some things that belong to me.
So what is Cersei referring to here? I actually have a few ideas, so let's activate theory time. Okay, theory 1. Cersei wants to recover Tyrion. Remember, he is the #1 fugitive that she still wants to get her hands on. She still blames him for Joffrey's death, and he actually did kill Tywin. Also, it's possible that she fears that he's part of that Volunquar prophecy to destroy her. So it's possible that she's sending the Golden Company to Dragonstone, or wherever Tyrion is headed next, in order to capture him and bring him back to her. Or theory 2, Cersei wants to recover Casterly Rock. Remember, it's her home city where she probably has a lot of fond memories growing up with Jaime and doing all kinds of other stuff with Jaime. Cersei, but now it's in the hands of the Unsullied. So the 10,000 Golden Company soldiers is just large enough to take on the 8,000 Unsullied, which there are probably less of now. But then theory 3, and this is my favorite theory. I think Cersei might want to recover the gold that she's about to pay the Iron Bank. So stay with me here. Cersei agreeing to pay back the Iron Bank in full. Now, it seems a little out of character for her, right? I think that part of her feels like the spoils that she just won from Highgarden really belong to her. So why not use the Golden Company to attack the city of Braavos and destroy the Iron Bank and basically take over financial control of the known world? Now, I'm not just pulling this out of my ass. Look at the way Cersei's acting in this scene. She's playing things close to the chest. She looks like she's messing with Tycho's head. Also, look where she's standing between these two pillars, wine in hand, looking out over the map, smiling in victory. Guys, this is the same framing as the day she blew up the Sept of Baelor. I really feel like Cersei is planning something treacherous here. But while we're talking about this shot composition, there's actually something even cooler happening with the visuals. So let's take this moment to dive deep into the imagery of this episode. I don't know if you noticed it in this scene, but it's actually taking place in the same room as Cersei and Tycho's scene last episode. You can see it's the same desk with the same book and the same candles and the same lion sigil that's in the background. But now everything has been flipped. The camera has literally been moved to the opposite side of the set, and it now puts Cersei on the right and Tycho on the left. Now, this was obviously an intentional move. The crew had to break down and reset up everything. Why did they do this? I think it's because Cersei has literally turned the tables on Tycho. She has shifted the status so that now he meekly follows behind her, asking what ventures he can help out with. Also, notice how last episode there was this blinding bright light beaming through the window, almost like an authoritative police spotlight catching Cersei in the act. But now the lighting has changed to be dark and murky. It's almost like Cersei has dragged Tycho down into the shadows. Now, Cersei's treachery bleeds over from this scene to the next one with Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, and Bran, which also has some parallel interesting imagery. Just like Cersei and Tycho's scene, this is also in a location that we've seen before. This is probably Bran's chamber in Winterfell. Where else would he be? And if you pay attention to the visuals here, this is a recreation of the moment that Littlefinger's referring to, the scene where Bran was attacked by the assassin in season 1. Notice how this moment begins with this threatening tone.
This is for you.
By saying this is for you, it's almost like he's about to lunge out and attack him. Meanwhile, Bran is totally vulnerable, covered in wolf furs, just like he was when he was under attack. So I think we're meant to feel like Bran is under this same threat again, and Littlefinger is behind it. So why does Littlefinger give Bran this pricey Valyrian steel dagger that was used to try to murder him? Now, Sansa actually indicates in a later scene that Littlefinger clearly wants something from Bran. The way Littlefinger is talking here, he's definitely playing the role of like mom's new boyfriend. I loved your mother. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. I want to be there for you. You can call me Dad. Littlefinger's goal is to gain Bran's trust, probably so that he can turn Bran against his siblings, basically divide and conquer the Stark children by using Bran to undermine Sansa the way that he tried to use Sansa to undermine Jon, because he could argue that Bran is the true Lord of Winterfell. I think he wants to get this young lord under his wing the same way he did with Robb and Arryn. But Bran isn't listening. He's just staring at this dagger, and then there's this exchange.
Do you know who this belonged to?
Interesting. So it seems like the show is reintroducing a mystery that they left hanging back in season 1 of who was really behind the hit on Bran. Now, for everything going on with this dagger, Filup and Maude actually went into this mystery pretty in depth in Westeros Weekly, so definitely go watch that. I'm honestly more interested in what Bran says after this.
Chaos is a ladder.
Now, notice how Bran is looking straight down the barrel of the lens of the camera, peering right into our souls, freaking us out the way he probably is freaking out Littlefinger here. The reason it freaks him out is because this quote is from a conversation Littlefinger had in private with Varys back in season 3 in the Red Keep, thousands of miles away from where Bran was at the time.
Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
So if Bran knows about that conversation, what else does he know? Remember, in that same conversation with Varys, Littlefinger hinted at a lot of conspiring against the crown. And what if Bran's eavesdropping doesn't stop at that conversation? Remember, there was all those little chats with Lysa.
You gave me those drops and told me to pour them into Jon's wine, my husband's wine. When you told me to write a letter to Kat, telling her it was a Lannister.
Also, a bit more recently, in season 5, there was that little deal he made with Cersei about Sansa.
And I'll know you're a man of your word when I see Sansa Stark's head on a spike.
As I said, I live to serve.
Yikes. Littlefinger clearly has a lot of secrets. It was just interesting that after preaching to Sansa last episode about considering all eventualities, this was definitely not an eventuality that Littlefinger prepared for. Now, one last thought about Bran before I move on. Notice how Mira is upset with Dr. Manhattan, how he won't show any real emotion or gratitude for everything she's done for him. And she says this interesting line.
You died in that cave.
Now, I think this line could have a deeper meaning. And hell, why not? Let's do a bonus theory time. Okay, so Mira is suggesting here that the Bran she knew died in that cave, like Bran has never been the same. But the boy Bran Stark wasn't the only person to die in that cave. A lot of people did. Specifically, the previous three-eyed raven, the Old Man, Max von Sydow. Now, the books imply that the Old Man in the tree might be a character named the Blood Raven. That's Brynden Rivers, another Targaryen bastard during the Blackfire Rebellion. He actually fought against his bastard brother Aegor Rivers, who I mentioned earlier. He's the founder of the Golden Company. But the show hasn't gotten into that at all. Instead, they've left the Three-Eyed Raven's backstory more of a mystery. Now, why did they do this? Here's where I'm going with this. I think that old man could be Bran, years and years from now in the future, time traveling back to himself in the present, counseling himself on the wars to come. I mean, that would explain how he knew to bring him back to Winterfell in his visions. That would also explain why the old man seemed unable to walk. Really, I think Bran and the Three-Eyed Raven being one and the same person would really be the most effective and efficient way to close this whole loop on this time travel headache that the show could be setting up. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on this theory down in the comments. Okay, moving on to Arya finally coming home to Winterfell. Now remember last episode, another long-lost Stark kid, Bran, was pretty easily recognized. He didn't have any trouble getting into Winterfell. But now Arya's having trouble with these Winterfell bouncers. Now, why is that? Now, at first I thought this could be a reference to the character Jane Poole from the books, who's also in the show, but not as much. Now, in the books, she becomes an imposter version of Arya Stark that gets married off to Ramsay Bolton, pretty much Sansa's storyline in season 5. But the creators of the show said that this scene was inspired from Greek mythology when the character Odysseus from the Odyssey, after a long, epic journey, returns home and no one recognizes him. And actually, this isn't the first time Arya has taken after this famous journeyman. In the Odyssey, Odysseus also tricks the Cyclops by telling him that his name is Nobody or No One, which is pretty much Arya and Jaqen H'ghar's catchphrase. And really, this whole idea that a long journey changes the hero so much that he or she looks physically different so that they're a stranger to their own home is what this is all about. Actually, I think this is another example of our theory that Arya is the stranger of the New Gods. Since her time with the Faceless Men, she has literally become no one, a face in the crowd. We actually get another reminder of Arya's past after she Batmans away from these two dummies down to the crypts, where she tells Sansa about Eddard's grave.
It doesn't look like him. Should have been carved by someone who knew his face.
So yeah, as a former faceless person, Arya is an expert at recreating faces. Guys, her Walder Frey impression, spot on. Even though she has a face that no one will recognize now, she's acutely aware of what other people's faces should look like. Now, I gotta point out that all of these Stark family reunions that we've been waiting years and years for, they've all been pretty awkward, right? Like each returning Stark has changed so much from who they were. Last season, Jon reunited with Sansa after getting stabbed to death and coming back to life, something that not enough people are talking about, honestly. And these characters don't even know yet that he could technically be heir to the Iron Throne. Now, Bran has come back as the Three-Eyed Raven. He's a warg and he can see through time, and there is no version of himself left remaining. And now Arya has come back as this version of the stranger and a faceless man. She's still in this revenge mission, and she now has these like super heroic fighting skills, and she's a master of disguise. So compared to the rest of her siblings, Sansa's journey, despite all the crazy turns it has taken, has been weirdly more normal than everyone else's. Then, as Sansa tells Arya that Bran is home too, notice that we hear a raven caw as this scene transitions to the Three-Eyed Raven himself in the Godswood. So just like he did with Littlefinger and Sansa before, Bran now spooks Arya by revealing something he could have no way of knowing.
I thought you might go to King's Landing.
Now this is interesting because that's not just any moment in Arya's timeline. Remember back in episode 2 of this season, Arya's decision at the end of the crossroads was a symbolic crossroads for her as a character. Bran says here that he thought Arya was headed to King's Landing, and he was surprised to see her divert from that path of vengeance to take another path north, home to Winterfell. So even though Bran can see everything, it is still in pieces, and I think the only pieces that stand out to him right now are the pivotal character defining moments. So looking back, I don't think that we weird conversation with Sansa was just random. That was a key moment for her development as a character. Then notice that when Bran gives Littlefinger's Valyrian steel dagger to Arya, he says this line,
It's wasted on a cripple.
Now this actually reminds me of another moment that a crippled character handed off a Valyrian steel weapon to someone who might get more use out of it. Jaime giving his sword to Brienne. Now Brienne named that sword Oathkeeper to represent her vow to Catelyn Stark to protect her daughters. Actually, I think that is why we see Brienne immediately after this seeing the Starks together and taking comfort in the fact that her oath was kept. By the way, I just want to point out that the show has been very meticulous about tracking where each Valyrian steel weapon is. It seems like they want to make sure that when the time comes to use these weapons, they're all in the right hands. Also, I want to point out that it's interesting both of these characters, Bran and Jaime, burned down these super valuable weapons, both of which were historic relics from the War with the Five Kings, spoils if you will, but I have some interesting thoughts on this that I'll get to at the end of the video. And then as Littlefinger watches Bran with the sisters with suspicion, there's another Ravenclaw. So even though Littlefinger is watching Bran, the three-eyed raven is watching him. Okay, moving on to Dragonstone. And yeah, this scene between Daenerys and Missandei is staged pretty much like a high school rom-com. Now as they're gossiping about the many things Missandei and Grey Worm did, they're almost like schoolgirls clutching their books to their chests. And then yeah, when Jon shows up, look where he's standing. He's at the bottom of the steps, almost like Daenerys is being presented on a prom date, like in She's All That or Titanic. Titanic was about prom, right? Missandei gives Daenerys this look like, girl, get it? And then Jon takes Daenerys on the perfect date that he knows from Ygritte is a sure slam dunk, a cave. And oh boy, sparks are flying, guys. Jon is leading Daenerys by the arm. And then things are getting hot and heavy as they step into each other, lit only by the firelight. And Daenerys is like, on your knees. And then later, Sir Davos is like, man, I noticed you checking out her good heart. Okay, looking past this hot aunt-nephew action, which I don't know if you've seen this, but I'm gonna leave this clip right here. Notice that the cave that Jon leads Dany into is actually the same one that she passed right by on her arrival day at Dragonstone in the first episode. Daenerys had her eyes so much on the prize that she missed a huge game changer that was right under her nose. Okay, so then once they get inside this dragon glass cavern, there are two huge things that happen in this scene. First, these walls are covered with these ancient markings made by the children of the forest. And since I consider myself an archaeologist / action hero, in the vein of Indiana Jones and Lara Croft, let's look closely and decipher what these images might mean. The new Rockstars' favorite game of zoom and enhance. Okay, so these walls are covered in circular shapes, some of which we've seen before, some of which are new. Now, some of these are spirals, some are the traditional Archimedean spirals, some are just concentric circles that don't really connect. There's also a circle with a line drawn down through the middle vertically, and then there's this whorl spiral pattern, which Filup actually referred to as an octopus when it gets mad. The creators of the show said that this cave is actually based on real-life prehistoric caves in southern France, like in Lascaux or Chauvet, and they singled out the specific symbol of the spiral as an image that appears a lot in real human ancient history. Specifically, some of these might be based on the triskelion, which is a 3-branch spiral that appeared in ancient Greece and Sicily. Now, of course, we have seen the White Walkers make similar patterns in the past. In season 1, in one of the first scenes, they arranged severed human body parts, wildlings, in this same shape of a circle with a line drawn through the middle. And remember in season 3, they arranged severed horse parts in a whorl angry octopus pattern.
Always the artists.
Now, later in the series, we learn that that symbol might have originated with the Children of the Forest, Remember, the stones at the Weirwood tree where the Night King was created were arranged in the same spiral. In fact, in this scene, when Jon shows Daenerys the cave drawings of the children and the first men together, we see the whorl spiral and the bisected circle side by side. So I'm thinking that maybe these are the symbols of the children of the forest and the first men, and that maybe that's why we saw the White Walkers use those same exact symbols. They could have been doing it as a warning against those particular groups. Like, men, we're calling you out, and we're using parts of you to do it. Now, one last hieroglyphic to point out here are these comparatively super detailed drawings of White Walkers. Zoom in and enhance. They even use separate blue paint for their eyes. I mean, this is weird. We just saw the doodles that they did. Jon, are you sure you didn't draw these yourself? Also notice this White Walker drawing. This guy's wearing a crown, so presumably he's the Night King, but here he has this beard. Now the Night King we know doesn't have a beard, so what, did he shave, or was there a different Night King at some point? Or maybe the Children of the Forest mythologized this character the way we do with Santa Claus, like this white bearded monster from the north who steals your children? Anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments. Okay, before I get to the second key detail in this cave scene, the reason we get to make these videos, because guys, we can't do this for free, is because our good friends at Audible are sponsoring it. Audible offers a wide selection of audiobooks and podcasts, and you can get a free audiobook with a 30-day trial by going to audible.com/newrockstars. Now, I listened to George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series on Audible. I loved it. I'm actually currently listening to A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is a prequel series taking place 100 years before the events of Game of Thrones. It's awesome. Again, just check out audible.com/newrockstars or click on the link in the description to start your trial today. Okay, back to this second interesting moment in this cave. Notice how when Daenerys asks Jon to bend the knee again, she uses some very interesting words.
Isn't their survival more important than your pride?
So just like how Littlefinger felt when Bran told him chaos is a ladder, Jon here is like, whoa, how did you know I said that? Remember, Jon used those same words in season 5 to try to convince Mance Rayder to bend the knee to Stannis Baratheon.
Isn't their survival more important than your pride?
Pride? Fuck my pride.
So in that moment, Mance taught Jon that it isn't a matter of pride to refuse to betray your values and enlist your people in a Southerners' war. The fact that Daenerys is still demanding that Jon kneel shows him that she's still fixated on the wrong war. Okay, so then outside, after Daenerys learns about Tyrion's Casterly Rock plan not quite working out, she snaps this at him.
Enough with the clever plans.
So this is a callback to the advice that the late Olenna Tyrell gave her back in episode 2.
He's a clever man, your hand. I've known a great many clever men. I've outlived them all. You know why? I ignored them.
Anyway, better get back up to your brooding cliff, Tyrion. Okay, stopping back in Winterfell, we get this awesome friendly fight between Arya and Brienne. Notice how when Arya walks in, Brienne's combat advice to Podrick is interesting.
Don't lunge. Don't go where your enemy leads you. And don't
fight someone like her in the first place.
If you think about it, this is wise war strategy advice that also applies to Daenerys' invasion plans for Westeros. Don't lunge applies to Daenerys making the first aggressive lunge by trying to bring the Dornish army up to siege King's Landing, and that confidence allowed Euron's fleet to ambush them. Second, don't go where your enemy leads you applies to Daenerys and Tyrion sending the Unsullied to Casterly Rock, which is exactly where Jaime was leading them. And 3, don't fight someone like her in the first place. This is advice that Daenerys actually heeds. She doesn't fight Cersei directly. Instead, she picks a fight that she can win. Also, I like how this fight choreography between Arya and Brienne matches the fight choreography between Arya and Syrio Forel in season 1. Brienne, like Arya at that time, uses broad, two-handed swings and lunges. Meanwhile, Arya, like Syrio, now uses a more agile fencing style. One-handed jabs, often keeping the sword behind her back. So this is another example of how much Arya has changed. Remember, in season 1, she desperately wanted to train with a sword with all the boys of Winterfell, but she wasn't allowed to. But now, look at the way she handles that dagger. Arya, that's Valyrian steel. Are you crazy? And then notice how Arya ends this scene.
Who taught you how to do that?
No one.
Now, of course, in case you didn't notice, that's a reference to, I don't know. I mean, you get what that's a reference to, right? I don't have to keep doing this every time. Now, back in Dragonstone, I love this little exchange between Jon and Davos.
How many men do we have in the north to fight in? 10,000 less?
Fewer.
This is Davos remembering the recurring frustration of grammar Nazi Stannis Baratheon.
And it's 4 less fingernails to clean.
Fewer.
Less enemies for us.
Fewer. What?
And then it's interesting how Missandei points out that the concept of a bastard doesn't exist in her home island of Narth. This kind of feels like that scene in episode 2 when she told this to Daenerys.
Your Grace, forgive me, but your translation is not quite accurate. That noun has no gender in High Valyrian, so the proper translation for that prophecy would be the prince or princess who was promised will bring the dawn.
So Missandei here is helping our heroes realize that these strict Westeros interpretations of the titles don't really matter anymore. Daenerys can be a princess that was promised, and Jon doesn't have to carry around the title of bastard. I think this is a key step in him accepting his identity, especially when he discovers his true lineage. And quickly, when Theon returns, it's pretty nasty between him and Jon, and this bad blood went back way further than Theon trying to take over Winterfell and serving the Boltons. Remember, in season 1, Theon was kind of a dick to Jon. In Winterfell, Theon was a ward, and the bastard Jon Snow was really the only person that he could consider lower than himself on the totem pole.
That one's yours, Snow.
Okay, here we go. Moving on to the main sequence of this episode. Guys, maybe the best battle we've ever seen on this show. I mean, at least it's up there with Battle of the Bastards, Hardhome, and Blackwater. This showdown between the Lannister forces and Daenerys' Dothraki horde and her dragon pays off so many things we've been waiting to see on the show. Of course, a dragon arriving to Westeros mainland and laying waste to an army, but also we get to see the Dothraki horde in action finally, which remember is something that Robert Baratheon warned Cersei against back in season 1.
Only a fool would meet the Dothraki in an open field.
And yeah, it's pretty ironic that now Cersei is that fool. It's her army that's losing here. But I gotta point out my favorite shot of the Dothraki. Several of them simultaneously stepping up on their saddles and firing arrows while on horseback. Now the crew actually wanted an example of how skilled the Dothraki were on horseback, and the stunt guys pulled this off with a custom designed saddle with an extra stirrup that they could balance on. Also, yeah, let's face it guys, we've never seen the Lannisters lose this bad on screen before. Since the show didn't really have the budget to show every battle, which means we didn't get to see their loss of the Whispering Wood. Now, the director of this episode was Matt Shakman. This is the first Game of Thrones episode he's actually directed. And let's look at the specific ways that he calls back past famous battles on the show. Okay, so first, notice how it has this slow build. It begins quietly with a rumble in the distance. If you remember, the battle at Hardhome began the same way, and the approaching enemy army gradually appears in the form of a storm cloud looming over the horizon, just like it did in Hardhome. This battle also does a really good job with point of view. It depicts this big, messy melee through the eyes of its key players so that we never lose sight of where everyone is. In fact, it uses the same style of a long take tracking shot with Bronn scrambling in the midst of the chaos, just like a similar shot of Jon in the melee of the Battle of the Bastards. Both shots even include the same detail of a soldier getting wiped out suddenly by a horse. And just like the Battle of Blackwater, this battle casts Bronn as the wild card, specifically using artillery to change the tides of the battle. Actually, while we're talking about that Blackwater battle, we should mention that that battle gave Bronn his knight title, Sir Bronn of the Blackwater, and that body of water is the same body of water that this river leads into. We're not 100% clear where in the Crown Lands this battle's taking place, but I'm pretty sure this is Blackwater Rush. And yeah, these horrific shots of soldiers on fire is reminiscent of that same Battle of Blackwater. These characters are all disgusted and freaked out the same way that the Hound was. And if you think about it, the Lannisters are kind of paying their debts for the way that they destroyed Stannis' men. Sure, I guess that doesn't apply to Tyrion Lannister, but hey, at least he looked horrified at both of these battles. By the way, notice how the soldiers are desperately trying to pull off their armor as if the metal has gotten so hot it's burning them. This matches the way that Daenerys described her ancestors' dragons in the books. She said that the dragon's breath was so hot that it could melt a knight's armor and cook the man inside. But it's not just the ways that this battle reminds us of past Game of Thrones battles that makes it so great. It's what makes it different. Specifically, Shakman chooses to humanize both sides. Remember, with every other battle, there was more of a clear good side versus a bad side. Even when the lines were less clear, I would say that on some level we wanted Stannis' fleet to win at King's Landing and were disappointed when it didn't happen, and I think we wanted Castle Black and the Wall to survive in that war against the Wildlings. And in this battle, even though it is pretty satisfying to see Daenerys and Drogon burn the Lannister line, this episode does not make that easy to look at. Like, I don't know about you, but I didn't want to see Bronn or Drogon die. And when Tyrion was cursing under his breath as his brother charged at Daenerys and Drogon, his character is saying exactly what we're saying in that moment.
You fucking idiot.
And this sequence actually does a few key things to make us feel this empathy. One, before the battle, they include this scene between Jaime, Bronn, and Dickon about how men defecate themselves when they die. So Dickon here is realizing that the whole idea of glory of war, it's a myth. This isn't a spectacle. These are real men suffering horrible deaths. And then as the Dothraki cavalry charges in, Shackman includes these close-ups of Lannister soldiers literally trembling with fear. So just like that scene with Arya and Ed Sheeran back in episode 1, this season is really trying to humanize the Lannister troops. By the way, if you were looking closely, and I guess if you care about baseball, one of these Lannister soldiers, this is a cameo, Noah Syndergaard from the New York Mets. And yeah, this sequence definitely emphasizes the suffering of these soldiers more than any battle we've seen. Specifically, this one close-up shows a Dothraki horse hoof stomping into this ashy corpse, and then another shows a soldier's ashes blowing away as if in a nuclear blast. This is normally the kind of violence against the human body that we only see enacted on reanimated corpses. But despite all this disaster unfolding around them, Jaime and Bronn act incredibly heroically. Bronn saves the day by operating the Scorpion, which he's pretty darn effective with. And Jaime refuses to abandon his men, and he keeps enough of a level head to rally archers against Drogon, and later to charge at Daenerys. By the way, I think Jaime here is mentally returning to that key moment that defined him as the Kingslayer, when he stopped Daenerys' father, the Mad King, who wanted to burn them all. And now Jaime is seeing Daenerys burning all of his men, and he's desperate to slay the Mad King's daughter the way he did his father. Actually, let's not forget, Jaime Lannister is one of the best jousters in Westeros. In the Tourney of the Hand in Book 1, he made it to the final 4 of the joust after defeating his Kingsguard commander Barristan Selmy. And when the Hound eventually beat him, Ned Stark observed, "Sir Jaime Lannister rolled in the dirt, golden and dented," which is exactly how Jaime ends this joust. Now, sure, Daenerys is heroic in other ways, specifically the fact that she actually shows up in this battle, which I'll admit is pretty badass. Also, the fact that she heeded Jon's advice to mercifully not attack a city filled with civilians and attack just the soldiers instead. But really, guys, let's admit, Jaime and Bronn are the Jon Snows of this battle. I also want to point out how there appears to be some real-life cinematic influences on this sequence. So, like the Battle of the Bastards did, this episode seems to also draw on great pitch field battles of films like Braveheart, Lord of the Rings, and Akira Kurosawa's Ran. But this scene also adds another dimension to the battle, aerial firebombing from Drogon. And the shots of Drogon torching the Lannister supply lines seem to be inspired by the napalm bomb raid in Apocalypse Now. And actually, the creators of the show described Drogon as what it would be like for an F-16 to be dropped into the middle of a medieval battle. And when Bronn rotates on the Scorpion, at first this kind of looked like the Game of Thrones version of a mounted gun turret, kind of like in Pearl Harbor or in Star Wars. But I think this is actually drawing from one of the most famous man versus beast battles in movie history, Jaws. So Bronn is a lot like the character Quint. He's a salt-of-the-earth badass who croons these crass songs. And notice how in this scene there's a point of view shot of Drogon within Bronn's crosshairs. That is just like the shot of the shark in Quint's harpoon gun crosshairs. And just like Brody does at the end of the movie, Bronn gets a clear shot that ends up taking down the beast.
Come on, you fucker.
Smile, you son of a...
But just like how the shark takes the boat down with him, Drogon takes out the Scorpion with flamethrower and tail whip. And like in Jaws, the two men end up in the water. By the way, I think the shot of Jaime sinking away from the camera with all of his limbs stretched out is meant to parallel the plunge that Bran took when Jaime pushed him out of the broken tower in the first episode. The final element of this battle that I really loved was the music. Composer Ramin Djawadi's score was, as always, a big part of this episode. In fact, you might have noticed the House Stark theme playing when Arya returned to Winterfell, and then again a few minutes later when she smiles at the Stark sigil in the courtyard. But here Djawadi does something really interesting, mixing the House Targaryen theme, which we hear as Drogon soars in and rains hell, mixing this with a darker version of the Reigns of Castamere. Remember the Lannister victory song, but now changed through the tone of the music to a song of defeat. We hear this as Jaime fights hopelessly through the chaos. And then later as Tyrion and Jaime watch their fellow Lannister men suffer. Okay, wrapping this up here, let's revisit the title of this episode, The Spoils of War. Now earlier I mentioned how the spoils of war refer to valuables that a winning army loots from the losing side. In this case, the gold that the Lannisters looted from Highgarden. But when you think about it, that gold is really what doomed Jaime here. Right before this battle, Lord Tarly informed him that the gold made it to King's Landing while the rest of the line was falling behind. So prioritizing the gold's safe return slowed this army down and ended up leaving them exposed. You could argue that if Jaime just sacked Highgarden and set up a base there, Daenerys would be forced to attack a city and harm innocent civilians, which was the same rationale that kept her from attacking King's Landing. But no, unfortunately, because Cersei is in debt to the Iron Bank, Jaime had to grab the gold. So this episode as a whole is redefining the spoils of war as bait in a trap, a shiny treasure that tempts a soldier's greed, tricking him into pushing things a step too far. So for example, with Bronn, even after Jaime pays him handsomely with this heavy bag of spoils, Bronn gets greedy. He still wants his castle that was promised to him. So he sticks it out with the Lannister army and suffers their worst defeat alongside them. But then later, Bronn drops his bag of gold, and rather than turning around to get it, he leaves it behind, and fate rewards him. This is kind of like when Indiana Jones always has to give up the treasure that he wants the most, while his enemies give in and the treasure ends up destroying them. The spoil of war is a bait and a trap. Similarly, in this episode, Bran receives another spoil of war, the expensive dragonbone hilted Valyrian steel dagger, which Littlefinger explains is a relic of the War of the Five Kings. But Bran wisely refuses this spoil of war, not taking the bait in the trap that Littlefinger is setting for him. Daenerys refuses the bait as well. The spoil of war that she wants her hands on is the Iron Throne, which itself, remember, is forged from spoils of hundreds of wars past. In this episode, Daenerys comes closer than ever to just attacking King's Landing outright, but she listens to Tyrion and Jon, and she denies herself the spoil for now, and instead scores a strategic victory that denies everyone else any physical spoils. And that brings us to Jaime in these closing images. So last episode, Olenna taunted Jaime for his past military mistakes, a fateful foreshadowing of this episode, but she also left him this warning about Cersei.
She'll be the end of you. Possibly.
Yeah, this episode shows how fighting his sister's battles leads to Jaime's downfall. Actually, if you were listening carefully back in the opening images, Bronn totally explained this all very eloquently, as he tends to do.
Oh, is that why you're so fucking glum, eh? All your new riches weighing you down?
And now in these closing images, we see Jaime Lannister, golden indented, literally weighed down by his golden hand and his golden armor, while his character has been weighed down by the spoils of war. Do you think Jaime's a goner here? Also, what do you think Cersei wants to recover using the Golden Company? What do you think about my theory about Bran being the same exact person as the old version of the Three-Eyed Raven? And let me know what you make of those markings in the Dragonstone cave. You can also tweet your thoughts directly to me at Erik Voss or to New Rockstars at New Rockstars. And definitely send us any questions you have. And if you do, make sure to include the hashtag Westeros Weekly so that Filup Mod and me will see it, and maybe we'll answer it in Westeros Weekly or in the breakdown. And of course, share this video and subscribe to New Rockstars for more Game of Thrones videos, and make sure to check out our breakdowns of episodes 1, 2, and 3. And if you want to help us expand this channel and do more videos like this, you can contribute to us on Patreon. All right, thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye.